This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. In particular, this month is being sponsored by Lindsay Marie Trebet and Nick Martin. I thank you both so very much. And if you want to become a patron, you can do so at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And I am joined this time by Mr. Joshua Cutchin.
Greetings.
And the long-lost Red Pill Junkie.
Lost and found like a left shoe.
And this show is going to be it's going to be about something someone asked Josh actually on Twitter, which was why Josh didn't really support the extraterrestrial hypothesis, what his problems were with it. And your response was kind of like, someone, I think Red Pill, you were the one that said, well, go check out Where the Road Go or whatever. But there's no one show, I think, that we've ever, devoted to this. It's just been spread about through all of them. And I totally appreciate you saying they should just go listen to all of them then.
Of course.
But it's a good topic to get into because I think it's something that actually can be applied to any field of the paranormal. That people isolate this stuff out and they don't see bigger pictures because of it. They make assumptions and they don't really look at the data because they're seeing it through kind of angled glasses, I guess, with blinders on.
Well, and to be clear for me, it's less about me being anti-ETH and more about me taking issue with people thinking that the only viable option is the ETH.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Because I think if your starting point for the reason that the ETH extraterrestrial hypothesis is the best answer is because metaphysics is bunk, you're building on a false foundation right there. Because compared to something like UFOs, psi phenomena just has the best research, the best laboratory controlled research, the best peer reviewed research of any of these subjects. And if that's the case, and if you take that in conjunction with the number of alien contact experiences that include some sort of metaphysical aspect, it points to the fact that there's the possibility for something stranger than the ETH, in which case we can't say that the ETH is the only game in town. And that's sort of my main building block is that if you throw out, and of course I'm talking differently about, compared to lights in the sky, although there are plenty of, metaphysical telepathic messages and whatnot received in those accounts, but I think that it is a narrow-minded thing to say, oh, well, it must be little green men and they have telepathy. Well, if they have telepathy, it could be a lot of things. It could be a lot of things. Because these are things that have been talked about extensively for millennia in magical traditions. Mm-hmm. And there's somebody, I don't tend to block people on Facebook or on Twitter rather, but there was somebody that just had to block because they were making fun of the fact that I think that there's some validity to magical practice, and they were standing on the firm side of this this new disclosure movement and joking about how it doesn't make any sense that it's not extraterrestrials and magic and psi phenomena is woo, and I'm just like you're ignorant. You're not doing any of the research, and it's just like I'm just with somebody who would butt their head into conversations that they were invited into, and I was just like, this is too much trouble.
And may I just point out the deep irony in the fact that all these new faces, people involved in ufology that were brought up, are really excited about what the stars are currently doing. I call them the UFO young guns, or sometimes the TTSA fanboys when they really annoy me. But they display this kind of like materialist thinking that Joshua is pointing out to, and there are even some really really smart people that are part of this group. People with really impressive credentials, academic, they're entrepreneurs, whatever. and when you engage in them in their conversation and they start showing their materialist color, saying, well, all this parapsychology is bunk, there is no evidence, no scientific evidence. The irony that I speak of is the fact that so many people that are involved with To the Stars were at the forefront of parapsychology research back in the 70s.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, guy, do you support To the Stars? Why don't you go and tell Hal Puthoff how you think that his work in the Stanford Research Institute is pure bunk? Let's see how that goes.
Well, that and there's far more evidence for psi phenomena than there is for any kind of extraterrestrial presence. But if we go back to the beginning of this, I mean, first of all, this phenomenon has been with us throughout time, and people like Jacques Vallee kind of brought that to the forefront. And if we look at when the extraterrestrial stuff started, it started with the Foo Fighters, and it started with Kenneth Arnold's sighting. And even that was taken out of context because Kenneth Arnold said he saw V-shaped craft moving like saucers skipped across the water. And he himself said he felt they were like some kind of intelligence, he never, attributed like extraterrestrial to it. That got put onto it after the fact.
Yeah, I think that he even mentioned that these objects were pulsating.
I believe so, yeah.
Living cells. Something that is always glossed over.
Yeah. And, that's why we get the term flying saucer from, and he never described saucers.
Well, and if you look at the way that these phenomena were understood for, again, millennia, they were understood in a spirit-based sort of context. And I think that, as entertaining as it is to think that maybe our ancestors were misinterpreting extraterrestrial visitation for spirit contact, I think we have to be intellectually honest enough to flip that on its head and wonder if we're interpreting spirit contact as extraterrestrial contact. And again, this isn't to say that I don't think aliens have visited in the past or that it might not be extraterrestrials behind it all. I just think that it's so intellectually dishonest to act like this is an open shut thing, that if UFOs are genuinely anomalous, they must be aliens. It's just it's such a leap that it really just gets to me. And there's something that Greg Bishop has talked about that he really likes, is this very Eastern spiritual idea of pulling an idea that is less popular to the center of the conversation, not because you necessarily endorse it, but because you're trying to help shed a more even light upon these things. And that's what I'm at least trying to do in a lot of these conversations.
There was this really amazing video that is available on YouTube. It's Jeffrey Kripal giving a very short presentation, 45 minutes. And he gives this awesome quote when he says that the problem with ancient aliens theories is they see the gods of past as ancient aliens. And then he says, I see the aliens as the modern gods. And that resonates with me a lot, because what he's saying is, like Josh is saying, that so presumptuous from both the ancient aliens crowd to try to deconstruct mythology and religion in nuts and bolts explanations, the same way that religious scholars try to see UFO current events as angels and demons.
Yeah.
What people like Jeffrey Kripal are trying to say is, okay, let's go beyond these two paradigms into a new explanation, into understanding something that I listened to another podcast. I think the name of this guy is Eisenstein. Saying that it's not talking about, maybe it's not talking about spirituality, but it's acknowledging that there is an aspect of matter that we don't understand and that we overlook.
Mm-hmm.
That is not just action and reaction.
But when you look at how we got to the ETH, it follows in line with science fiction and the rise of science fiction, where we see these lights that people have been seeing forever, but we don't realize that people have been seeing them forever. And so it's like, well, what could be in the sky? Well, we look to sci-fi and we say, well, it must be aliens. And then over time, it sort of kind of defines itself as that, which suggests a sort of morphic face to this stuff.
Well, and then we overlay our own humanized zoological studies on top of it. Oh, it's a catch and release program. Oh, it's this or that or the other, which, again, is a faulty place of logic to assume that even if it is extraterrestrials, that they'd have the same methodology that we would when exploring our world. Yeah, or that they even care about exploring their reality, or that they haven't already done it. You know, and you know, some of the things. For me, the things where the ETH really does break down, I mean, I don't really, you know, the idea that faster than light travel is difficult. I think there's a lot of holes that you can poke in that. That's not that's not what I hang my hat on. Similarly, some people have said that, you know, oh, why would they need to perform the same experiments over and over again? Well, again, you're making an assumption that, you know, you can't assume what they're looking for, so maybe it is a really longitudinal study. My problem is when you look at a lot of this, well, I mean, in addition to profound synchronicities and poltergeist phenomena that, you know, shows up in experiencers' homes, those are problematic too. But if you look at the pageantry of the alien abduction experience, the methods are much more primitive and invasive than our methods are currently. I mean, you know, you have them taking punches out of your hands to collect DNA. We need a cotton swab, and you're telling me that this civilization that's traveled across the universe doesn't have something even more sophisticated than our current DNA collection methods? It just doesn't hold up to any sort of logical scrutiny.
Agreed.
Yeah, exactly. There was I had a conversation with a friend of ours about the possibility that maybe the Tic Tac is some kind of like surveillance object or surveillance technology deployed by the United States. I'm skeptical of that idea, but there's that argument, right? That they're watching us. And then the late Mac Tonnies, back in, you know, like 15 years ago, was making the argument with nanotechnology. The surveillance technology tends to go smaller and smaller, not bigger and bigger. So why would an advanced space civilization will need to check on us using things that we can see with the naked eye?
Yeah.
And if you look at drone technology now and then, I mean, you keep on seeing stuff about, oh, it's a drone, you know, a spy drone the size of a hummingbird, a spy drone the size of a dragonfly, and, you know, it just seems like, yeah, that's an excellent point from Mac.
Yeah, you could have a drone the size of a needle pin, a pin needle.
Yep. And, you know, there's also the infrared thing. I mean, where you can get images of these things in the infrared that we can't see with our naked eye, and that always fascinates me. But there's something to the infrared because you can get it with all kinds of other paranormal phenomena as well. Like this stuff seems to kind of lean toward the infrared end of the spectrum, which John Keel, you know, suggested way back with the Eighth Tower.
Mm-hmm.
One of Andrew Collins' books, Alien Energy, he talks about a photographer who went out and took a lot of these infrared photos and would regularly get these objects that were not visible to the naked eye. But he never assumed they were aliens. He thought they were some kind of life form that's just not within our realm of vision.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, and that's sort of more sympathetic to ideas of, you know, interdimensionality. I don't know how I feel about that because it seems like it's just a moving of goalposts. Really, I mean, I'm of the opinion that whenever you get to a place where you're convinced that it's one thing or another, that's probably a good moment for you to sort of check your own personal bias. I mean, even for me, somebody who thinks that the fairy faith is extremely explicative, I don't think it's actual fairies.
Right.
I don't think it's fairies. I don't think it's aliens. I think it's, you know, as Terence McKenna said, weirder than we can imagine. I keep on coming back to that great bit of art that was done for the reissue of Passport to Magonia, That was, the picture of on the cover, it's a picture of an alien gray, and it's got 3 different masks, and one's a fairy queen, and one's a 1950s space invader, and one's a devil. But what got cut off of that framing when they put it on the cover is that the actual original art had another hand from just outside the frame up that was sticking up inside the gray. So the gray itself was a puppet as well for some sort of unseen thing, from the margins of the picture. And I think that is just such a, I keep on returning to that. I think it's such an explicative and powerful image, and really sort of nails the way I feel about all this stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess maybe one of the reasons why I started to reject the ETH as the 1-2 explanation for the UFO phenomenon is when I was led to observe what was left behind the argument, which is all the high strangeness, the absurdity with which the phenomenon behaves itself, because I think that the people who are the advocates of the ETH, they still have this hope that the phenomenon behaves in ways that we can more or less understand. Oh yeah, we're dealing with someone that is clearly more advanced than us technologically, but eventually we will get it, and we will be able to get it into some sort of relationship with it, and we'll join the Galactic Federation of Planets or whatever. But all the other thing that they leave behind that witnesses report that doesn't make any sense with regards to that argument, like for example, abductees seeing dead relatives inside alien craft.
Bingo.
Makes you think that I'm not saying that this is the place where I'll like put my flag and say this is the hill I'll defend. But right now I'm in a position in which I feel the phenomenon has more to do with what happens to us when we die than hypothetical travelers from outer space.
Kenneth Ring.
Yeah, Kenneth Ring's work with near-death experiences and their similarity to post-abduction people who think they've been abducted by aliens. But even that, the idea that we've been abducted by aliens. I mean, first of all, obviously, Josh can talk about how that mimics the fairy faith abductions, but so much of that information, so much of what's in the pop culture about it has come from hypnosis, and it's been shown pretty definitively that hypnosis does not recover memories. So what's being put in there into our database is literally invented stuff from the subconscious of people that has nothing necessarily to do with reality.
Yes.
Yeah, so a lot to unpack here, right? I've been toying with the idea lately, and I've mentioned it a couple different places, that when you go into a hypnosis session to recover memories, you might be put into some sort of altered state where you do encounter something, and what you're describing is what you think are memories, or actually what's happening to you in real time. I think that's an interesting idea to play with. So that's one thing.
And I think
the other thing,
I think Red Pill is the first one who ever brought that up to me.
Oh, I thought I came up with it myself, but great minds and all that. The other thing, and so it's talking about, in case anybody doesn't know, the similarities between a lot of these experiences: bright lights, bedroom invaders, buzzing sounds, the ability to transport through solid objects, seeing dead relatives, returning with enhanced powers, and poltergeist phenomena in your home. These are all things that are all shared by the alien, fairy, and near-death experiences. But I think we have to be careful, because I think what a lot of people get hung up on is this assumption that the alien abduction scenario is completely married to lights in the sky, and we really have to be careful of what Greg calls this surety fetish. This idea that not only that we know what it is, what things are, but that it's all 100% one thing. And I think we're really looking at, especially with the lights in the sky, as I've said before, multiple things. But I think that we really need to divorce some of these ideas that every alien abduction involves a structured craft. We really need to try to divorce that idea. The last thing that I've been thinking about, trying to check my own, my own positions is, part of the reason I look to the ETH with scrutiny is because I'm a big champion of these metaphysics. But, if human beings can harness these metaphysics, it's entirely likely that, an extraterrestrial civilization could have harnessed a lot of these different psi powers in really profound and extreme ways. So who knows? Maybe it is extraterrestrials, and they're so far advanced in this other aspect of our development that we have neglected. They went down a different path. They cultivated that more, that they are able to, bring up the soul of your dear Aunt Gertrude or whatever.
Sure, but also that leaves open the another avenue, aside from the ETH, the idea, okay, if human beings can harness these powers, then what makes us assume that they weren't harnessed in the ancient past? And, then we entertain the idea of the ancient breakaway civilization, the idea that in ancient times there were civilizations that were reached high levels of development, not like our own. I mean, I'm not talking about Atlantean iPads here. I'm talking about, like Graham Hancock says, that these people were able to tap into mental resources that we in our modern civilization really have no idea of. And obviously there's also new talk in the UFO world about these untapped mental sources having to do with the UFO phenomenon and the people studying the phenomenon from the shadows. I'm talking about, of course, American Cosmic by Diana Pasulka and the enigmatic Tyler. So there's that. There's the idea that maybe the UFO phenomenon is actually an ancient civilization that has managed to keep in the shadows, but they're still interacting with us in some level. And even, I don't know, I was very interested when even Bob Lazar himself, in one of his interviews with George Knapp on Coast to Coast, he said that sometimes he thought the famous or infamous sports model flying saucer that he allegedly worked in at S4 in Area 51 was very ancient. That it wasn't from outer space, but that it was something that they actually dug up from some ancient mine or something.
And if, as we are constantly being suggested in the media and elsewhere, if time is indeed not linear, I mean, who's to say that there isn't some sort of time travel component to this?
Bingo.
Well, that's certainly a possibility. The problem, I'm not sure what I think of the American Cosmic stuff. I tried to listen to an interview with her, and I had a real hard time getting through it. I don't necessarily trust anything Lazar says.
Sure. You shouldn't.
And I think, too, what we're looking at is that I think that we have a shamanic experience that's been hijacked turned into an alien encounter. And it's been hijacked by the culture and by hypnosis and things like that. And when you look at, ancient cave paintings, which we know to be shamanic experiences for the most part, and you see alien grays, the ET people will be like, well, look, they're ancient astronauts. But in reality, you get those entities in ayahuasca trips and things like that. So it's more likely that they were seeing these alien grays in their ayahuasca trips, in their altered states, their shamanic journeys. And so when you have people nowadays seeing them, and it's being then couched in this context of, oh, they're extraterrestrials doing experiments on you, it becomes a very negative experience. And the shamanic experience wasn't always a positive one. It was one where it breaks you down and builds you, puts you back together. And some UFO experiencers have gone through this very thing. But yet, we, as a culture, we don't accept those type of things. We don't even look at those type of things.
And it's very interesting you're bringing this up because recently, the most famous ufologist in the world, Dr. Jacques Vallee, was recently involved in a documentary that was produced in Argentina that is titled Testigo de Otro Mundo, Witness of Another World. That is going to be released in the United States in September of this year. As far as I know, was already released in Argentina last year. But it's about this. It's about the case of a young Native American Argentinian who's had all these encounters since he was 12 years old. And, where did the road go? Listeners should know that 12 years is a very liminal age, is when very interesting things can happen to you, poltergeist and such. And this poor guy didn't know how to handle it. And when the case was known in the Argentinian media that he had been quote unquote abducted by aliens, and he's 15 years old, and he's been interviewed, and he breaks down in tears, and then he becomes like the village pariah, Yeah. Nobody believes him, and then apparently this documentary views the phenomenon from a shamanistic point of view, like saying, okay, these beings communicated with you because they have a role for you, because you are supposed to be this bridge between worlds, which is basically what a shaman is. Right? A shaman is a conduit. A shaman is a vessel, a messenger, a medium between this reality, the one in which we're talking using these electronic gadgets, and another reality that is grander, that is bigger, that is incomprehensible to us. And Jacques Vallee actually shows this documentary in their latest Contact in the Desert conference that happened in Joshua Tree not too long ago. And he said, this is the phenomenon, right? This, not wingless tic-tacs using whatever hyperdrive, anti-gravity technology to the stars will be trying to recreate, or the U.S. Navy is trying to patent, but this contact with a bigger reality that involves all of us, right? Not just Top Gun Navy pilots or radar operators or intelligence officers working at the DoD. It involves all of us living today.
Yeah, something that I've played with along these lines is that, people have wondered why the secrecy around UFOs. And honestly, if a lot of the people who are, anti-globalist, anti-one world, new world order sort of folks would take a look at that idea through the, extraterrestrial hypothesis, it's often been said, and I agree with this, like the best way to, unite the world in some sort of like one world government would be to say that there are aliens. That would be the greatest excuse to clamp down on things in a totalitarian fashion, and it just doesn't make sense to me. I think personally that the revelation that there is a true, I'm going to say spiritual, but hopefully everybody who's listening knows that's a placeholder. There is a spiritual component to reality is the thing that the powers that be really fear, because at that point you're no longer answerable to them. You're answerable to a higher power, whatever that may be. You are not. It's sort of like the idea that what's the Netflix series that talks about that? The idea that the afterlife is proven, and then people would start like offing themselves and not really caring about what they're doing because. Right. Yeah.
I don't know which one are you talking about.
I can't. The Discovery, I think maybe it's called. But I think that's a far more profound, revelation than there are space scientists. Not saying that's not profound in of itself, but in terms of control, I think that is a much more dangerous narrative to power structures.
And I will question the idea that the world will actually unite against. Or to the idea of aliens threatening us. But because, the world hasn't certainly united at the idea of the one thing that we know for sure that is threatening our existence, which is climate change.
But is it the world that doesn't agree, or is it the corporate entities who don't want to change their ways that are then influencing the people not to change?
I don't know. I mean, I look at what is happening in Europe with these young kids, these teenagers, and these kids from, I want to say Sweden, but maybe I'm mistaken. Please don't hate me. Greta, I think is her name. That are making these protests and forcing their governments to notice, and most of the time they're just like you said, they're not taken into account.
Go ahead.
I don't know. What I mean is, people have become so distrustful of their governments and the modern media that if tomorrow NASA were to say, and this is something I think I have said on the show previously, if tomorrow there was the announcement that a killer asteroid was headed towards Earth, and we only have 5 years to prepare for it, to make some preparation to try to block it, avert it, destroy it, or hide in the ground, I guarantee you, like 3 years after that announcement, people will still be debating whether the news was true or not.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you have people who question everything, and part of the reason they question everything is because we've been lied to so much.
That is true. That is so true.
That's where it gets sticky. It's not that people are stupid, it's that they don't want to be fooled anymore.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't believe that there's a single bit of news that comes from a government establishment that isn't looked at and scrutinized and turned over numerous times to try to find an angle with which to consolidate power or influence policy or something like that.
Exactly. The government lies to us, period. How much they're lying and for what reason, that may change.
Sure. And then there's also academic scientific institutions that have refused to give a serious look to the UFO phenomenon because they operate on a system that is very zero-sum, is very predatory, the academic system. Everybody is competing with everybody for very scarce resources. So the worst thing you can do is bring ridicule into you. You bring ridicule into you by taking attention into things that are not accepted by the status quo, like UFOs, or for example, I'm amazed to learn, reading Jacques Vallee's books, that J. Allen Hynek was very interested in astrology, something he made sure to keep hidden from anyone of his college, including the people who he worked for studying UFOs.
Yeah. The argument I guess I have against the ETH is simply that like I said earlier, though, most of the evidence that we have for it is based on assumption. It's based on misinformation, and it's based on a cultural bias toward this idea of aliens visiting us.
Yes.
So many of these things that are seen in the sky, people don't see them come down from the sky. It's not like they're coming into the atmosphere and then stopping. Suddenly someone goes, "What's that light?" It's just there all of a sudden. And oftentimes they just blink out. More often than not, they blink out, or they go into a body of water, which is not something you would expect a spacecraft to do. A lot of people assume that, if the spacecraft can fly in space, it could go underwater, but there's two totally opposite things happening there. In space, you have a vacuum, but in water, you have an enormous amount of pressure on the outside of the craft. So by and large, one will have a very hard time doing the other.
Yeah, no, that's really an excellent point. There are a handful of dubious NASA films that, according to NASA, represent ice falling off of, where the camera is mounted or whatever, in the upper atmosphere. But yeah, very rarely do you see things or hear about things literally coming in and then leaving the atmosphere. Something that I often gravitate towards is you hear these again, people are just ill-informed talking about how, well, if what's behind the UFO is non-physical, then why does it leave physical evidence? And if you say that, again, you just haven't done the research. I mean, one of the first means of ghost hunting, back in the early days of ghost hunting, was spreading talcum powder on the floor and waiting for footprints to manifest. Non-physical phenomena can manifest physical effects. This is also something that psi phenomena, and again, all the laboratory studies and peer-reviewed works really suggest is that the non-physicality of our consciousness can influence the physicality of the world around us. Mm-hmm. Do your research, people.
Yeah, in all those spiritualist seances, reunions, one of the things that you will commonly ask of the spirits is to manifest a physical object that is called an apport.
Yep.
And like some of the common things will be maybe a ring, maybe a photograph, maybe a flower, whatever. But this is something that I have talked numerous times. What if the things that we talk about in the UFO field, like so-called alien implants, or even these now so uber discussed alien alloys, maybe those are apports too. Luckily, I'm not the only one who is thinking about along the same line. There are other people in the field who are discussing these issues, and I think that's a good thing. This is something that I wanted to see if the people who have analyzed these alleged UFO debris, these UFO slag or whatever, have also analyzed apports to see if they could find some commonalities. My gut feeling is that they will do so.
And to drag in the fairy thing again, I mean, fairies can manifest apports as well, and even the alien implant phenomena, I don't know how much I've talked about it here, maybe I have or haven't, but has a direct corollary in the fairy blast, which was this giant gust of air that the fairies could send your way, and it would cause a blister to form on your skin. In fact, the root words for blustery, blast, and blister all have the same Germanic root, and it describes, and the things that people would cut open when they found the fairy boil, the blast from the fairy blast from offending the fairies would be like bits of rock, bits of bone, bits of sort of anything, organic or inorganic matter. And if you look at a lot of what these supposed implants are, they often, it sounds just like that. In fact, I found an account of a fairy blast in Newfoundland, I believe, that was described as having bits of string sticking out of it, which sounds like Morgellons disease, which a lot of people equate with the alien, contact phenomena as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if people are uncomfortable with us talking about UFOs in spirits terms, okay, so let us then change or switch the term from spirits to hyperdimensional beings.
Exactly.
You can go and listen to Carl Sagan giving his explanation about flatland and higher dimensions. It's freely available on Netflix. How he explains the way that an inhabitant of flatland, like a square or whatever, meets with a sphere or an apple, and it will be something that he hears from a voice from within. Questioning his sanity. And all the manifestations that Carl Sagan explains in that video is something that you can correlate to both the UFO phenomenon and also encounters with ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
So this
and
is something.
And of course, and when you say that, encounters with fairies, encounters with even, I would argue, Sasquatch. I mean, it never ends.
Yeah, exactly. When the fairies tell the people, you like, for example, some farmer or peasant sees a small gnome, and the gnome tells him, "Yeah, you look me small, but I can change my size. I can be, tall or small, depending of what I want."
Right.
Yep. There are plenty of stories of fairies changing size.
Mm-hmm.
And not also to mention the fact that until Communion and Missing Time hit the bookshelves, the gray was not the most commonly reported version of what people were being abducted by. The gray became the common abduction afterwards, but only in countries in which this was published. So once it hit the cultural media, that's sort of the face it took. And you'll have debunkers who will say, well, that just proves that people are making it up. But I think it proves that the phenomena shifts based on expectations.
Suggests. I wouldn't say proves. I would say suggests that the phenomena changes.
Sure.
Right. Sure.
Also, the skeptic arguments to be made about whether the alien entities reported by Betty and Barney Hill were the result of them seeing an episode of these famous 60s TV shows. What's the name
Outer
of
Limits,
this?
wasn't it?
Outer Limits, exactly. Where there was this show where they show this alien humanoid with a big head and these slanted eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I don't know. People like Jeffrey Kripal will say that pop culture and the paranormal have a really incestuous, cross-pollinating relationships, and also who's to say that writer for the Outer Limits didn't have a previous encounter with a being with a big head and slanted eyes,
or even a weird dream,
or a weird dream, exactly.
So we separate those things out where it's like, well, what would a dream have to do with reality? But sometimes a lot, especially if we're dealing with altered states.
Mm-hmm. A friend of mine once said something really provocative, that maybe the classic stereotype, the face of the gray, is maybe it's a meme from the future projecting into the past.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like something Ren would say.
No, it's actually Rick Bishop.
No, but I'm saying it's when you're dealing with memes, that's kind of how Ren thinks about this stuff.
Right. Well, it's very mimetic, that's for sure.
Yeah. And you find it mimicking expectation, though, and that's another thing. Like, so much of this stuff doesn't come across as something extraterrestrials would do. I mean, there may be extraterrestrials here, and we may not even recognize them. They may be so unlike us in every possible way that we don't even know they're here. We can't even recognize them in any way, shape, or form. They can move among us without even being noticed. And I don't mean because they're like humans, but because they could be, let's say, gaseous in some way.
Yeah, someone I follow in Twitter, Mark Obscura Mentalist, there's something really interesting. The idea that since the most common life form in this planet happens to be bacteria and viruses, that maybe we should expect to interact. It's like what NASA says. Like, if they're looking in Mars for life, they're not looking for multicellular beings. They're looking for microbial life.
Right.
And if you consider how some bacteria interact with higher life forms, like, for example, the Toxoplasma bacteria that manages to hijack the higher functions of rats, and rats then become highly excited with cat's urine. So they start chasing cats. So the cat will eat the rat, and that finishes the cycle of the bacteria, the microorganism. Who's to say that there aren't alien microbial life forms out there that are hijacking us, into creating, I don't know, the internet, creating all these cities with pollutants, with all these people cramming up, and maybe all these miserable people that always live miserable lives, and these viruses feed of our miserable feelings.
Right. I mean, you look at the stuff we did on the show about like the documentary The Nightmare, and how sleep paralysis stuff seems to spread from one thing to another, just like that, like it's preying on us.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's certainly a possibility. Josh?
I think we lost him.
No, I'm sorry. I was muted. I mean, yeah, we get so far around to this again that it sort of turns into, you know, a new variation on how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. I agree with both of you that these are possibilities. But at what point do we say that a lot of, you know, different traditions have just interpreted this in a spiritual context, or that there might be some sort of interdimensional component as well? I mean, I think what I find equally interesting is not only, like, you know, the idea that certain extraterrestrials might be gaseous or something, but they might be embodied by something that we have no metric for measuring. I mean, if I recall correctly, there's an anecdote or like sort of a thought experiment in Michael Crichton's Sphere where he talks about a meeting of some scientists who, one of their first questions when positing an alien life form, so he says, well, where's the anus? And they sort of deconstruct the fallacy of that, the idea that something would even have to have an anus. So who knows if there's not some sort of undiscovered spectra of reality. I mean, you know, I just got done watching the Chernobyl miniseries, which is absolutely wonderful and dreadful at the same time. But you think about the discovery of radiation, and how that was something that people really didn't think about. And it was almost, and even to this day, I mean, I realize that, you know, it's on the electromagnetic spectrum and whatnot, but it does seem so alien and foreign to us that we had no means of measuring it for the longest time. Not the same way we would measure, you know, sound or light or anything along those lines. So sometimes I wonder if we're not dealing with something that is, again, so far our current grasp of what, you know, exists that we can't even comprehend the medium in which it functions.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes think of the analogy of an aquarium, and the fish in the tank, they perceive the tank as the whole world, you know, the whole of existence. They can't comprehend there's anything outside of it, and then they see that there's these like tube things that are penetrating their world, and they assume that there are like 5 different worms that are coming to get them. They have no way to comprehend that these worms are actually fingers that connect beyond their realms, beyond the surface of the surface of the water, you know, into a hand, and then into an arm, and then into, you know, a human body, and I guess that's where I'm at. The trying to remain humble with the idea that the ultimate explanation about the UFO phenomenon may be so incomprehensible that we may not be able to actually create a good framework for it. You know, maybe we're not supposed to be the ones that crack the UFO code. Maybe, you know, if we create artificial intelligence, maybe the only way to comprehend a non-human intelligence is with another non-human intelligence. You know, maybe our silicon-based children will be the ones to actually manage to get what UFOs are and what UFOs want, and manage to actually, you know, get into a meaningful interaction, a meaningful communion with them.
Fair enough. But there's also the possibility that we're dealing with multiple different things in that context.
Well, I'm more like Colin John Alexander. I'm more interested in trying to find a unified field of the paranormal.
Right.
all these things are joined together, and maybe the only way in which they are joined together is the fact that we perceive them. That we are the coalescing element, our consciousness, the way that we perceive and interact with them. And yeah, maybe getting back to the ETH, maybe alien beings from outer space come here, but that is so mind-blowing that the human witness his mind starts to trip, and then he changes his reality, starts to develop psychic powers out of that traumatic event. Yeah, okay. I should also entertain that.
Now, let's take a look at the current state of things with the let's look at the article you just wrote, Red Pill, for Daily Grail. And you're talking about how none of this stuff that's being released by to the Stars Academy is really all that interesting. I mean, first of all, the first thing I have to say with all of this is, you see these headlines, oh, the government admits it's studying UFOs. Well, of course they are. Anything coming into our airspace is going to be of interest to them, whether it's known or unknown. That doesn't prove anything. Anyone who thinks that they were literally ignoring this stuff is crazy. That's their job, is to make sure that these things are not a threat. Even Project Blue Book had on its agenda to diagnose whether or not these things were a threat to national security, and the end result was no, they're not. It had nothing to do with whether or not these were actual extraterrestrial craft or anything like that. In fact, they were just trying to spin it away anyway. You point out what we've been seeing a lot now just seems to be promo for this TV show that came on. When did it air initially?
Last Friday.
Yeah, and I didn't watch it. I wasn't particularly interested.
I did.
And what'd you think?
Again, someone asked me that question on Twitter, and what I answered is, I realized I am not the target audience for it, because they showed information that I already knew since last year. Well, since last year, because it focused solely on the Nimitz case that was started to be promoted since December of 2017.
Right.
So I understand that. And I understand this idea that, it's for the normies, that they need to get up to speed to where we are. Well, maybe. There's also some other elements that even people who are in the UFO community get a bit bothered with it. Even people who are on the side of the TSA. Like this idea of showing Louis Elizondo doing the same thing that is done in all the goddamn UFO shows, which is driving on his van to meet up the witnesses and interview him, and he's writing on his notepad and asking one of the witnesses, who is an anonymous woman, who was one of the, it was Commander Fravor's wingman during the Nimitz encounters, and asking her, so what did the object look like? And it looked like a giant Tic Tac. Like, please, this is not the first time that you knew that the object was a Tic Tac. This is something that you already knew since you allegedly ran ATIP. And then showing those videos to two experts in avionics, showing them the video and say, so what do you guys think? And the guy said, well, it's very interesting and very impressive. I don't know. I think this is something that we don't have the capabilities for. And it's like saying, is this the scope of the things that you did when you were running ATIP, man? Showing videos to experts and saying, hey, man, do you think this is one of us? Or what if? Did you not run any scientific experiments on the videos trying to determine velocities, accelerations, and whatnot? That is the part of the show that bothered me a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's just like anything else.
Yeah. Then of course there's the when they profiled Tom DeLonge and he explained the to the Stars origin story, which, to my mind, it still sounds so unrealistic. The idea that this punk rock star managed to knock the doors of all these people in the echelons of the intelligence world and saying, "Hey, I read up all the books. I know what you're talking about. You can use me in order to spread the goodwill of disclosure. I can help you have a better public image with the millennials because all of them think you suck." And all these all these generals, all these directors in the skunk work said, "Okay." To me, it strains the imagination, and that's coming from someone who thinks high strangeness in ufology is the most important thing. And I'm not the only one, because there's also all these, well, not all, there's not a lot, but there's a few people who are paying attention to this story, or starting to make the same questions, like Terry Rogaway, who writes for The Drive, and even the people from To the Stars were praising him because he was writing these articles from an outlet that had nothing to do with UFOs, because they're focused solely on military technology and whatnot. So they were getting attention from this side. But then he started to make tough questions about Tom DeLonge, and that's when he became the enemy. Same with Keith Clure, who is a journalist for The Intercept, who published an article about Louis Elizondo the day after Unidentified was premiered, questioning whether Elizondo had actually been not only the director of this ATIP program, but also if he had been involved at all. And that has created an entire storm of infighting in the small, crazy UFO world of social media. With people saying that he's part of the deep state or of the powers that be that want to shut down disclosure, and the other people like myself and Jack Brewer and John Grigwald from the backlog and say, well, no, he's actually making questions about whether we should actually trust these people who claim to have all the answers about life, the universe, and everything. And everybody in the UFO world embraced them with arms open, and they became like the Messiah, and nobody bothered to actually check their credentials.
Yeah. Well, they were saying what people wanted to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the metaphor that I keep on coming back to, is imagine your hall pass, right? So like your sexual paragon. So if you're into dudes, it might be Jason Momoa. If you're into girls, it depends. I'm partial to Amy Adams. But imagine them coming up to you one day and saying, "Hey, not only do I want to have sex with you, but I want to give you $1 billion." Are you not going to view that skeptically? A lot of the arguments that I've seen too are just, well, you don't have any proof that I shouldn't believe in some of the things that are being said. I'm just thinking to myself, that's the first day of Logic 101 class.
Yeah.
And it's not that I don't think that there's something to a lot of this stuff, and I don't think ATIP actually probably have found out some interesting things. I just don't think people are asking the right questions. What's the left hand doing while we're watching the right? Why now? Why not talk about the high strangeness, which we know has been investigated as well? And I'm not anti-TTSA. I'm not anti any of this stuff. I'm anti people who who can't think critically and be cautiously optimistic. I'm not saying you can't be enthusiastic. I'm not saying that there isn't some really cool potential stuff that could come out of this. But when people are treating it so much like a faith, that really is problematic for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a guy whose handle is literally UFO Jesus. And he's one of the biggest, I don't know, cheerleaders of what To the Stars does. You know, Louis Elizondo, whatever. And this guy's work seems to be, you know, releasing memes on social media, Twitter and Facebook. See, that's another new development in ufology. That long are gone the days of when we debated things on long blog posts and comments on those blog posts. Now everything is a meme war. Everything is, selling bullet points and spreading them in viral form. And I don't feel the UFO phenomenon can fit in a meme. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And that's very accurate. I mean, there's a subtlety there. But what I was saying at the beginning, too, is that what we're talking about now applies to all fields of the paranormal. I think there's something that goes throughout all of it. And it's treated with, you get the same problems in each element of the field where people make these assumptions and they're looking for that, you know, with UFOs, you're looking for disclosure. Some people in the Bigfoot community are expecting the government is covering this up. You don't get that so much with ghosts and stuff like that, but it's all looked at from a very particular lens.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of looking at what are the commonalities in all these experiences.
Yeah, and get very disenchanted with people who go and say, well, my field is ghost hunting. And I know that aliens may be real, but I'm not really into it. You know, let me just worry about my ghosts and don't bother me with your UFO stuff. It's like, okay, that's your privilege. But I feel that if you close yourself to what's happening in these other fields, you're not even going to learn a lot in your own field. You know, by not researching these commonalities that we've been talking during this transmission. You know, what does Bigfoot or cryptid sightings got to do with UFO sightings? Which had to do with ghost sightings. We have to do with psychic phenomena, which have to do with near-death experiences.
Right, right.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just a quick interjection. You know, I'm not sure if this is all the same thing, ghosts, Bigfoot, psi, you know, the UFO problem, but these Venn diagrams overlap, and if you don't see that, you're just not looking into it enough, I don't think.
Sure.
They overlap, and they overlap in very particular spots, which may be how we perceive stuff from somewhere else. Doesn't mean it's the same thing that we're perceiving. But there seems to be a mechanism there.
Yeah, an amoeba is different than a paramecium, than is different than a virus, but they have things in common.
Right.
And
right.
a microbiologist will be a fool just to focus only on the amoebas if he wants to understand, human disease.
Yeah, and a lot of it I'm finding comes down to electricity. You find anyone who has any of these experiences often have sensitivity to electronics afterwards. Either they're sensitive to the stuff or they affect the stuff. If you go and like lights, as we've talked about on the show, lights are an extremely common element in all of this. And lights, of course, can be connected to electrical stuff. Someone like Andrew Collins has posited that what we're dealing with is a form of plasma intelligence. Well, that's also connected to electrical phenomena. So it seems like electricity is something we're missing on all of this stuff. You know, UFOs knock the electricity out of cars, ghosts drain batteries, and things like that. there's a lot of overlap, and one of those places that it overlaps is with electrical phenomena.
Yeah, maybe electromagnetic, this electromagnetic phenomena or interference that you mentioned, maybe it's like the shadow of a multi-dimensional being projecting into a reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's like the result of this presence, the way that it jumbles up with our realities. Oh, yeah, you see this electromagnetic interference, or you see this charging of energy that is interpreted by our retina as light, you know?
Yeah.
And definitely it should be investigated. But I guess what we're saying here is be open-minded. If you're just looking for ETs in metal craft traveling to this planet, sure, you'll find evidence of that, because the UFO phenomenon is big enough to encompass that. The same way that if you look for cases of time travelers, or if you're looking for evidence of secret American government projects, yeah, you'll find plenty of evidence that the UFO phenomenon is interjected with that. But it's not the big picture. By far, it's not the big picture.
And let's not forget, too, that the government has used the UFO phenomenon to cover up test stuff.
Sure.
You know, they have flat out, admitted to this in the past.
They have used it to cover stuff. They have used it to fish out moles, and foreign agents that have come in contact with UFO buffs, right? And asking questions about aliens in Area 51, but what they're actually fishing for is information about the latest skunk work secret projects, right? So obviously, also the intelligence world is keeping tabs on UFO groups because of that, not because they necessarily have an interest in what they may or may not know about UFOs.
Which is interesting to place in the context of sort of this new Cold War world that we're in, with all the saber rattling between the West and Russia, and not to mention China as well. What I find interesting too is that I've spoken with friends of mine overseas, and none of the sort of TTSA stuff is getting any of the same amount of press and attention that it is over here, and I find that curious as well. Because I would think that if it is as earth-shattering as we're being led to believe, and again, I'm not anti-TTSA, I think something could come out of it. But if it is, if they've already supposedly been had this giant earth-shattering effect on the community, why isn't it being talked about as much overseas?
Yeah, the unidentified wasn't aired in the Latin American version of the History Channel.
Really?
I searched for it. Yeah, I searched for it. I said, okay, let's see. A ver, antiguos astronautas. No. I said, where is it? Where is unidentified? Nothing. I was like, okay. Now, so I guess this is only American centered.
Well, and I get that for like perhaps their distribution laws and different. I mean that I don't find quite as confounding as just the press coverage in other countries as well, which you just don't. I mean, have you seen it? Have there been any stories in Mexican media about all this?
I have to say yes.
Okay.
Very, very scarce. I read. I'm subscribed with one of the biggest newspapers in Mexico, Reforma, never mentioned the New York Times article. It was picked up by a few other outlets, but only in passing. Nothing central. It's like, oh well, I guess the gringos, the gringos contacted UFOs. Okay, whatever.
And I think also the fact that there's no, when you tell someone that the extraterrestrial hypothesis may not be the answer, well, then they want to know what the answer is.
Yes.
And it's like, well, but we don't have an answer. It's just that the evidence, at least to me, doesn't really hold up. It doesn't mean it's not extraterrestrial. I just don't think that's the go-to. I don't think that should be the go-to. I think that go-to has been an assumption that has been built into our culture, and that it doesn't necessarily reflect what we're seeing. However, I can't really explain what we're seeing either.
Yeah, but I think that everybody started with the ETH. I mean, it was the thing that we all grew up thinking as kids. Yeah, ET is here. The Loch Ness Monster is a plesiosaur. Bigfoot is an undiscovered ape. Ghosts are the spirits of the dead. Mm-hmm. And Scooby-Doo is investigating all. But if you after a number of years, if you stay in the same way of thinking, man, you failed at this. You didn't understand what this all was about. Because to me, the ETH of you in ufology is the first step, the first step into a long journey of self-discovery, into a long journey of unraveling newer things and discovering all these connecting dots and realizing that in the end UFOs are really not that important. In the end, right. UFOs were only the luring thing that got your attention when you were a kid, like the things that parents put in front of their on top of their children's cribs to keep them entertained. Like that, oh, you see that, these things like that, they're moving around and swirling, and they keep you entertained, and they stimulate you, whatever. But it's not the thing that you should be paying attention when you're 15 years old.
Right.
You have to move forward. You have to progress. You have to start thinking about consciousness and altered states of reality and life after death, and how that maybe is related with quantum mechanics and all of that.
And that connection. You look at books like Kenneth Ring's Omega Project, and most people in UFO lore have never read it.
Yeah.
Because it's not, they're not interested in near-death stuff. And even when it was suggested to him that he read Communion, he said, I'm not interested in alien abductions. I study near-death experiences. And, he was finally convinced to read Communion, and he sat there going, there's similarities between these two completely different seeming events.
Yeah. You read Jacques Vallee, Forbidden Science, and his journal of the 1960s. When he used to go to the esoteric libraries of Paris in search of ancient books about magic, encounters with sylphs, elementals, and fairies. He will talk to the bookshop owners, and they will not be interested in UFO accounts. They thought they were trash. They didn't believe in the witness testimonies, and it's like these people believe in magic, that they're not interested in UFOs, and then Vallee also posed the question of UFOs to parapsychologists, and parapsychologists were, we're not interested in that. We're only interested in this little field in which we're trying to prove life after death and extrasensory perception. So it's the problem. There are so few people that were willing to take a more holistic view of all of these, and I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying you will make a lot of big steps into it. And also, I'm not saying that there isn't an importance in specialists, but you definitely still need a few people who are able to look into the big picture of how all these dots are connected.
Yeah, and that's the key to, like, what is reality, I think. You know, understanding this stuff literally is, it's like if we can unravel some of this, we unravel a little bit of who we are and why we're here and what this is.
Yeah, and you've said it plenty of times, Seriah, and I give you credit for it, that to me, the ultimate importance of the UFOs is not about how to learn the secrets of traveling to the other side of the galaxy and back, but it's about questioning the nature of reality.
Mm-hmm. Learning more about who we are and what we are, and I mean, it seems like we are a part of this. It doesn't exist at random. It's something that is personally connected to the experiencer, mm-hmm. which right at that very point, with nothing else, suggests that there's more to us than we realize.
Yeah. I right now, I remembered that interaction between Betty Hill and the leader of the group of entities that captured her and her husband, when she asked where they came from, and then the leader pulls out this famous star map, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The thing that the leader says to Betty is, "Can you find yourself in the map?" And Betty, of course, says, "No, I cannot." And then the leader says, "Well, if you don't know where you are, there's no point in telling me where I come from." I see that interaction from a symbolical, almost an hermetic, cipher.
Yeah. Yeah.
Know yourself first before you try to learn where these things come from.
Right. But it's given in such a literal context that people have tried to translate that map that she recovered through hypnosis into determining where these things came from in a physical sense.
Yeah. Yeah. The problem, the ETHers are very literalists about all of these, where I think people who entertain others' ideas, they appreciate the symbolic aspect about all of these. It's, for example, when I read the New York Times article and I read the description of this object that almost had a near collision with the F-18 fighters, it was described as a transparent sphere with a cube encased in it, a black cube encased in it.
Right.
And obviously, me being the one that is interested in symbology and interested in magic and hermeticism, thinking, maybe someone was trying to communicate with us using the symbol of something that represents the squaring of the sphere, the squaring of the circle.
Yeah.
Which is one of the most important alchemical ideas from ancient history.
True. Yeah, and then you bring the alchemy into it.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes me wonder, about what these metamaterials are. I mean, if you're familiar with the alchemical process, maybe that's, I know that Miguel was going down the Aport sort of line of thinking, and I'm not saying that these are literal, like, alchemical relics or artifacts of some sort, but it's just something else that's worth considering. And I think that if you, as Miguel said, I think that if you are involved in this and you don't start to see the metaphysics, and I'm not even saying like going really strange, but just seeing the metaphysics, like basic stuff like telepathy and some of the things that people report in their lives, like these profound synchronicities, if you don't start to see that, you don't want to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any last words?
My last words regarding, a lot of this TTSA stuff is, it would be great if we're wrong. It would be great if there's some sort of irrefutable proof that comes out,
I think that's a carrot on the end of a stick.
Mm.
Well, my final thoughts will be, it will be interesting to see if they release more groundbreaking information about these cases, sure. But at the end of the day, you don't need the government's permission to try to learn more about these things for yourself. You yourself have already all the means at your disposal capable of finding more about this, instead of waiting every Friday night to see what DTSA is willing to reveal to you. And that's also another thing that bothers me about the modern disclosure movement, that it is so goddamn passive. They're waiting on their couches, waiting to be fed the information instead of looking it for themselves. If you see disclosure as a social movement, you compare it to, for example, the gay rights movement, it's like a disgrace, because the gay rights movement, they fought for their rights. They fought for the chances to be tolerated the way they are, their rights to be the way they are. They fought for years and years, and they pay the price in blood. Yep. What's the price that the disclosure movement has paid?
Yeah. And why should we believe anything the government says?
Well, yeah,
the government's going to tell us whatever is best for them for us to know.
Yeah. They maybe they'll be successful in making the argument. Oh well, there are these things that are buzzing around, and our F-18s are no match for them. And the viewer will say, okay, so what about my neighbor who says that she's been abducted by aliens? Is that part of this thing they're showing me too, or are there two separate things? I don't know if they'll have an answer.
Josh, anything else?
I just would encourage everyone to be cautiously optimistic. I think that's
a good way of putting it.
Well, that's the way that you get the most out of life, I think, is to be cautiously optimistic in pretty much everything that you do.
All right. Well, I think that illustrates at least a little bit of why at least the three of us don't necessarily just jump on the ETH bandwagon. It's not so much that it's not a possibility, it's just it may not be the most logical answer to explain all the data. And if you're not explaining all the data, then it's not a good theory. It doesn't mean we have a theory to replace it necessarily. There's a lot of possibilities, but you don't need to have a theory to replace it to understand that it's not explaining everything.
It's okay to say, I don't know.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right, where can people find you, Josh?
JoshuaCutchin.com. And here more often, hopefully.
That'd be awesome. And Dreadpill?
thedailygrail.com, mysteriousuniverse.org, absurdbydesign.com. And also, our good friend Mike Cleland just released a book that commemorates the 10th anniversary of his blog, Hidden Experience, and I wrote the foreword for it.
Oh, nice. I didn't know Mike did that. That's cool.
Yeah, so you can find it right now on Amazon.
Nice. All right. Thank both of you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Pleasure.
And Where Did the Road Go would not be possible without the help of our Patreons. And especially those patrons pledging $10 or more. Allison Cook, Lindsay Marie Trebet, Nick Martin, Super Inframan, UFO Weekly News, Tim, 36 Dingo, Maria, Jennifer Campbell, Mike McGuire, American Rambler, Paul Buscini, Nate Seriah, Anthony Sullivan, Kevin, John Rutledge Foster III, Eric Citron, Ben Crow, Janet Runyon, Andy McNamara, Sasha Lorg, Matthias Sunby, Christopher Vaughn, Riker and Stark, Robert Groom, Sean Cosgrove, Jose A., Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cicernos, Kevin Schreck, A.E. Gaia-Quinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Chris, Ice a Hot Dog a Sandwich, John Eddy, Carla Mahoney, and Chris Johnson. Thank you all so very much. All right, there's a Patreon extra segment where we answer some AMA questions, and that will be up this week. It's part one of the AMA, because we got a couple of AMA questions from Patreons, and then we recorded that, and then we got a bunch more cool questions. So if you want to become a patron, please help us out. Go to wheredidtheroadgo.com and click on the Patreon link. And you get extra content every month. You get shows early and some special bonuses now and again. Plus, you help us out, and it means a lot to me. It really does. And, of course, everything you need can be found at wheredidtheroadgo.com, and we'll see you next week. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.